Hello, I'm Sandy Longhorn, and I'm so excited to be talking with Molly Spencer about her latest book of poetry, Invitatory, winner of the New Measure Poetry Prize and released earlier this year by Parlor Press. This book is a stunning collection of lyric poems filled with imagery that reveals a speaker grappling with what it means to live in our complex times, times of loss, grief, and devastation, but also times of sustenance, joy, and perseverance. Here we are offered some shared wisdom and a sense that all are welcome to the conversation. Molly's first book, If the House, won the 2019 Brittingham Prize, judged by Carl Phillips, and her second collection, Hinge, won the 2020 Crab Orchard Open Competition, judged by Allison Joseph. You can read individual poems, critical writing, and essays in numerous well-regarded literary venues, among them Field, Plowshares, Prairie Schooner, Kenyon Review, and The Rumpus, just to name a few. I've been lucky enough to call Molly my friend since we met as fellow poetry bloggers looking for community nearly 20 years ago. Molly, thank you for joining me to celebrate your latest collection.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Sandy. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I really appreciate you spending time on Invitatory.
And so I thought we'd just start if you would read us a poem from the collection.
Sure. So I'll just show readers the physical object of the book here. This is all flagged because it's my reading copy. And I'm just going to start with the first poem in the book, which is called Rowing and Then Light. What's given me by the river, I'll leave to the river. Islands of sky flicker the brim and then light on the tangled marsh. Light where the cedars toppled, bone-like and silver. And later, hours of slow progress, swaying marsh grass and the unrushed wandering of water. The heron, unseen alongside, the heron rising blue and somehow silent, though surely such unfolding has a song or a cry, the heron lifting, the heron breaking open into flight. And who can I tell this to now? The children rowing on ahead of me, the far west of you? This is my account. I didn't see the heron edgewise, then I saw it. Wasn't rowing at all, only dipping the blade of my one oar here, then there, to steer a little. Let me drift, going nowhere in the moment the heron met my mind, though the moment was flawed and devoid of meaning. The cedars were not silver, not bone-like, the heron's flight not soundless. I'll speak of this to no one. The river bears me along.
Oh, thank you so much. That is such a beautiful poem. And I think as an introductory poem to the collection really shows that imagery work that you're doing throughout the book. So to speak of the title and the fact that there are a series of poems within the book, the invitatory poems, the invitatory is part of the Roman Catholic liturgy of the hours, and it's a psalm and a call to prayer. I was really interested in that because while that's the title of the collection and the focus of so many poems, the book doesn't feel overtly religious. So could you speak a little bit about how those poems are acting as psalms or calls to prayer for the speaker?
Sure, and I hope they're also calls to prayer for the reader,
Yes.
but a particular form of prayer, a secular form of prayer, really, kind of in the tradition of Simone Weil, right, who said attention taken to its highest degree is prayer. Um, I hope what these poems do is invite all of us to that form of prayer, that paying attention to the world and its horrors and its sublime beauty and, the whole package. But also, I hope the poems are an invitation to all of us to really think about and interrogate our perception of the world and ourselves in it. Um, and to pay attention to our interior lives and also to language, right? It's raptures and its failings. Um, so I think you're right that the book is not overtly religious, but the call to that form of attention feels very important to me, both as a human being living my life on the earth, but also as a way of attending to the work of a poet.
Thank you. Yeah, as you were talking about that, I was thinking of how many images in the book are so, as you said, focused on the natural world around us, but then we are seeing the interior world by paying attention to the natural world. We're able to somehow mediate the difficulties and joys of this being by also observing that in what's around us. So kudos to you on that.
Thank you.
Um, as a poet reading the book, one of the other things that struck me was how easily you move between these brilliant, short, compressed poems that are flashes of emotion and consideration. And then you have several long sequence poems in the book. And usually the longer poems are broken up into sections. Sometimes they're numbered, sometimes they're just demarcated by a symbol. And I wondered if you could talk just a little bit about what you think the shorter poems offer that the longer ones don't, and vice versa. And also, when you were ordering the poems in the book, were you thinking at all about how these two forms spoke to each other?
Great question. It did not move easily between the long poems and the short poems at first. In fact, I had no idea how I was going to order it, and it was difficult. I mean, I had ordered it, so many times. I finally found the right order, and um, so I think what I love the most about short poems is their reticence. You're not going to get a ton of context. There's not room for, the whole story. Um, so they create this quietude and and actually I think an opportunity for the reader to kind of rest for a moment and to collaborate with the words on the page, because the short poems and short poems in general, you know, they don't give over a lot of meaning because they can't. They're short, and so I hope they're an invitation to the reader to kind of collaborate on the meaning of those poems. Um, as I said, they're also kind of a rest from the longer accumulative, kind of obsessive poems of the book. So I think, that the gestures of return in the book, the kind of enactment of obsessive thinking, the questioning of perception, all of that, long poems were like the right container for that because they can bear the weight of accumulation and obsession in a way that I don't think a whole bunch of short poems could.
Mm.
Um, so as I said, I did think a lot about the ordering. It took me a very long time to figure out how the ordering would work with the shorter versus the longer poems, but I did eventually get there. Um, so I guess that's what I'd say about the short poems versus the long poems.
And just as an insight into your practice, when you were drafting, would you know, like, oh, I've started this poem and it's going to end up being something short, or did you know when you started the longer poems, or is it something that evolved in that mystical way? that drafting evolves?
Well, I don't know much while I'm drafting. What I'm doing when I draft is I'm following image and language and the workings of my mind. I do like to set challenges for myself. And most of the poems, not all, but most of the poems in Hinge, my the first book I wrote, but the second published, and If the House, are kind of a standard page, maybe page and a few lines length of poems. And I didn't want to do the same thing again. So I kind of set myself a challenge to write some short poems.
Yes. Well, you succeeded.
And well, thank you.
They're brilliant. Um, and then finally, my last question. Um, you alluded to it in your answer to the last question, but the recursive nature of the imagery in the book, or the repetition of images. I called it doubling of images. So we're introduced to certain key ideas early in the book through imagery, and then they come back, they're revised, they're revisited. The one that stands out the most to me is the use of windows or looking through glass in some way. But then even within a poem, you sometimes have something like a line that says, a harp string plucked. And as we read on, we encounter string of a harp unplucked. It's amazing to me how this way of mirroring of central imagery builds the lyric essence of the book. So how conscious are you of practicing this technique as you draft? And as you put the book together, did you go back and make changes to any of the poems to heighten that awareness?
Um, so again, I'll say I'm not real conscious of much while I'm drafting, just
Mhm.
again following what comes to mind, or what language I hear, or what image I see. Um, but once I had, kind of a critical mass of poems,
Mhm.
and I could step away from them and read them not as the poet, um, I did notice it, and I did kind of leverage it as a tool for building the collection.
Mhm.
Mostly, I was just following the obsessive loops of my mind, and I think those revisitings, sometimes revisions, of imagery, also enact one of the main questions of the book, which is, and one of the main questions of my life, actually, which is, am I seeing accurately? Can we see accurately? Can we trust our own perceptions of the world? I'm pretty skeptical about us being able to do that. Um, and so I think in some ways, I lucked into it just by following my manner of thought and the ways that I was as a human being, trying to talk to myself about all the contradictions of the world, and of love, and of family, and parenting. And so, yeah, at the beginning, I was not super aware of those gestures of return and revision, but as I became aware of them, they did help me write the rest of the book.
Wonderful. Um, we don't have time for another question, but I'll just say you've alluded several times to following language. And knowing you and your process, I know that etymologies are huge, and you've answered this question elsewhere. But uh, do you have a particular favorite phrase or word or piece of language that you just love and would like to share with us?
I don't know if I have a favorite.
Or
I think
maybe,
I'm I think I'm particularly proud of the last poem in the book, which is also the last of the title series, which I started working on in 2010, and never really knew if it would turn into anything or not. And now here it is as the backbone, of this book. But I think I think some of the imagery and phrases in that last poem were real helpful to me in understanding what this book was, because it took me a long time to figure out what I was doing. So that last poem was a little bit of an anchor for me. And it actually had been written, I revised it, but it had been written a long, long time ago. So it was kind of a starting place for me to anchor me to a process that I did not understand. I did not even know if I was writing poems. um, and that was really different from my previous work.
Would you read that one for us as a way to close
Sure,
the interview?
sure, I will do that. Again, it's one of the invitatory poems, so the title is Invitatory. Dawn again, and the birds of oblivion sing of all hungers. Each day I wake to a pillar of light kindling the room into being once more. A crease in the rug, someone's future stumble, the pale melt of bedclothes at my thighs. Mine is not the face of peace, but of the found out. The lamp's diminutive thorn of light sharpens at my bedside, a whole world waiting again for my yes. I should also say that poem is an emphasis of Henry Osawa Tanner's Annunciation painting. So it really is heavily steeped in the imagery of that painting,
Mhm.
which is a painting of the Blessed Virgin Mary looking very teenaged, um, and kind of, waking up, having almost a bewildered look on
Mhm.
her face at this incarnation of the angel Gabriel,
Mm.
who is coming to tell her that she's about to be the mother of God, literally. Um, so it's indebted to that painting as well.
Um, I I love a successful ekphrastic poem like that, where we read the poem and we can enter the poem and love the poem as it is, but then knowing that double meaning and that extra meaning of the allusion to the art, we can then experience it over again in a new way by knowing that information. Um, well, I just want to congratulate you on the publication of such an amazing collection. For anyone watching, you can buy the book from Parlor Press, bookshop.org, or other retailers, and I will put a link in the comments. Molly, it's been wonderful talking with you. I'm grateful for your presence and your poems. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with as we close?
Well, I would like to say thank you so much for this conversation about the poems in the collection. I'm very grateful to you for that. I think what I would leave with, especially my fellow writers, is to not be afraid to try something new and different from what you've ever done before, even though you feel completely at sea doing it. As I said, I had no idea what I was writing for the first few years of working on this book. I didn't know if it would ever be anything. And the poems were very different. And my process was, in some ways, different from the work I'd done before. It was very bewildering, but I just, again, trusted my mind. I followed image and language, and eventually, after a lot of hard work and a lot of ordering and reordering, ended up with the book.
Wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Yes, thank you, Sandy.